Sometimes in politics, it isn't the long speeches, the grand gestures, or the carefully written policies that shift the course of history. Sometimes it's just one word that can change the tone of a conversation, reshape an alliance, or even bring a world leader's plans to a grinding halt. Tonight, we're going to talk about how one such word, spoken by India's foreign minister, Jaishankar, sent ripples all the way to Washington and left President Trump's vision for India in pieces. When we talk about the power of diplomacy, so often we picture these marathon negotiations, endless communiques, and long-winded statements filled with technical jargon. But every once in a while, a moment comes along that reminds us it isn't about how much you say, it's about what you say, and more importantly, how you say it. Words carry weight. Words can move nations. They can break down walls. And yes, sometimes they can stop even the most determined leader in his tracks. And that's what happened when Jaishankar chose just one word, one precise, deliberate, and unshakable word that changed the conversation with Donald Trump. See, the brilliance of that moment wasn't in its volume. It was in its precision. Trump came to the table with his usual confidence. He had a vision for India, and he believed he could wrap that vision in the same kind of bold rhetoric he used with so many others. He thought he could bend, push, or pressure his way into an agreement that would suit his agenda. But standing across from him was a man who understood that diplomacy is not about who speaks the loudest, but who speaks the sharpest. Jaishankar knew that if he got drawn into a back and forth, if he let himself be caught in the whirlwind of Trump's style, he'd lose the clarity of India's position. And so, instead of offering paragraphs, he offered a word. Now, that word wasn't emotional, it wasn't loud, it wasn't exaggerated, it was calm, it was firm, and it was rooted in something deeper than the politics of the moment. It was rooted in principle. And the impact was immediate. Because when someone throws 1,000 words at you and you respond with just one, the silence around that word grows louder than anything else in the room. Trump expected negotiations. He expected back and forth. What he got was a wall of certainty that said this far, no further. And that is the genius of diplomacy at its finest. It's not about showing how much you know. It's about showing how much you mean. That word told Trump and the world that India wasn't going to be bullied or dazzled into submission. It wasn't going to compromise its sovereignty for applause or bend its long-term interests for the sake of a short-term deal. With one word, Jaishankar managed to reaffirm something every nation wants to hear from its leaders, that their dignity is not negotiable. What makes this moment even more powerful is the contrast it revealed. Trump was a master of the spectacle. He thrived on the theater of politics, grand entrances, powerful slogans, and the idea that charisma alone could close the deal. But in diplomacy, theater doesn't win the day. Clarity does, restraint does, discipline does, and Jaishankar brought all of those to bear with surgical precision. He reminded us that leadership isn't measured in how many sentences you can deliver, but in how much conviction you can place behind a single one. And let's not miss the lesson here for all of us, because it goes beyond politics. In our own lives, we are often tempted to talk more, to fill the silence, to overwhelm with explanations. But the truth is, power lies in precision. The right word spoken at the right time, with the right intent, carries more influence than an entire speech given without conviction. That's what Jaishankar did. He distilled India's position, India's resolve, and India's independence into something undeniable. He gave Trump no room to maneuver, no ambiguity to exploit, and no weakness to lean on. What followed wasn't just a pause in Trump's plans, it was a recalibration. That word reshaped the balance of the room. It turned what could have been another chapter of one-sided pressure into a moment of equal footing. And it showed the world that India's diplomats were not going to play by someone else's script. They were writing their own. That's the kind of strength that doesn't just come from knowing the issues. It comes from knowing yourself, knowing your values, and being willing to stand on them when the pressure is at its highest. It's the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout because it knows the truth speaks for itself. And that's why that one word mattered so much. It wasn't just about rejecting Trump's plan. It was about affirming India's identity on the global stage. Because sometimes one word is all it takes to change everything. When we look back at that moment, what becomes clear is that it wasn't just about one word. It was about two entirely different ways of engaging with the world colliding in real time. On one side, you had Donald Trump, a leader who thrived on instinct, who moved fast, who believed that boldness and pressure could get him the deal he wanted. On the other side, you had Jaishankar, a diplomat who built his approach on discipline, on strategy, on careful preparation and long-term vision. And when those two styles met, it was inevitable that one would give way. The surprising thing for many was that it wasn't the louder voice that prevailed. It was the steadier one. Trump believed in what you might call the art of improvisation. He liked to size up the room, test boundaries, and see how far his force of personality could carry him. And in domestic politics, that style often worked. It caught people off guard. It threw them off balance, and it made him appear larger than life. But diplomacy is a different arena. In diplomacy, every word, every pause, every gesture is calculated. It's not a performance. It's a chess match. And Jaishankar was a master of that game. He wasn't moved by showmanship. He wasn't distracted by the theatrics. He had studied the board. He knew the moves. And he was prepared to wait for the exact moment to strike with precision. The clash of these two approaches came to a head when Trump tried to press his vision for India. He expected Jaishankar to either bend under pressure or to engage in a long debate where Trump's energy could dominate the conversation. Instead, Jaishankar gave him something he wasn't ready for: discipline. Discipline in his words, discipline in his tone. Discipline in refusing to be pulled into an argument that wasn't on India's terms. And what happens when impulse meets discipline? Impulse gets cornered, because here's the truth: impulse can win headlines, but it doesn't win history. History is shaped by those who can see beyond the moment, who can hold their ground, and who can resist the temptation to be swept up in the noise. Trump wanted to move quickly to close a deal that would suit his agenda. But Jaishankar wasn't thinking about the next headline. He was thinking about the next decade. And when you bring that kind of long view to the table, no amount of bluster can shake it. Think about how difficult that must have been in the room. Trump was known for dominating conversations, for cutting people off, for pushing his weight around until others gave way. But Jaishankar didn't flinch. He didn't speed up his rhythm. He didn't match Trump's volume. He stayed measured. And in that discipline, there was strength. He showed that calm doesn't mean weak, that restraint doesn't mean passive. In fact, in that moment, restraint was the most powerful weapon he had. And let's be honest, discipline is not glamorous. It doesn't get you the cheers right away. It doesn't light up social media or make for dramatic television. But in diplomacy, it's the bedrock of respect, because leaders all over the world watch how you respond under pressure. They measure not just your words, but your poise. And when Jaishankar held his ground against Trump, it sent a message far beyond that room. It told the world that India wasn't going to be swept into someone else's storm. It was steady, it was prepared, and it was in control of its own course. That's the difference between discipline and impulse. Impulse seeks quick victories. Discipline seeks lasting ones. Impulse looks for applause today. Discipline builds respect for tomorrow. And in that clash of styles, Jaishankar reminded us that diplomacy isn't about who talks the fastest or the loudest. It's about who has the patience to stay true to principle, even when the pressure is high. So when Trump's energy met Jaishankar's discipline, the outcome was inevitable. Because in the long run, it's not impulse that endures, it's discipline. That one word wasn't just a response in the moment. It was a signal, clear, unmistakable, that India would not allow itself to be defined by someone else's agenda. And that's what made it so powerful. Because what happened in that exchange went far beyond Trump's plans. It reshaped the very foundation of how the United States and India would deal with each other moving forward. For years, America had often approached India with the mindset that it could be persuaded, nudged, or even pressured into alignment. But in that instant, Jaishankar flipped the script. He made it clear that the relationship would not be one of dominance and submission. It would be one of equals. And that's the beauty of how history sometimes works. You can have decades of negotiations, endless treaties, elaborate strategies. But then there comes a moment, distilled into a single word, that shifts the balance. That moment made sure the U.S.-India relationship would never again be about America calling the shots and India following along. It became about partnership. It became about mutual respect. It became about India charting its own path and the world having to acknowledge that independence. For Trump, this was more than just an unexpected obstacle. It was a reminder that America couldn't simply export its way of doing business onto another nation's soil. Trump believed in quick deals, in leverage, in the idea that the sheer weight of American power would tip the scales. And in many places, that approach yielded results, but not with India. Because India, through Jaishankar, made it clear that sovereignty wasn't a bargaining chip. No matter how tempting the short-term benefits, no matter how grand the promises, some things were simply not up for negotiation. And this wasn't only about Trump. This was a message to every world leader watching. India was no longer the country you could underestimate or sideline. It was a nation prepared to stand toe-to-toe with anyone, even with the President of the United States, and say politely but firmly that its future would be written in New Delhi, not in Washington, not in Beijing, not anywhere else. That one word wasn't just a rejection of a plan, it was an assertion of identity. Now, when you think about the ripple effects, they are profound. U.S. policymakers had to recalibrate. The old playbook no longer worked. If America wanted India on its side, it couldn't rely on pressure. It had to rely on trust. It had to engage as a partner, not as a patron. And that subtle but critical shift has defined the trajectory of the relationship ever since. The two countries still have differences. They still debate, they still negotiate hard. But the balance of respect in that relationship changed forever because of that one moment of clarity. And it's worth reflecting on the courage that takes, because standing firm against the most powerful office in the world isn't easy. The pressure is immense, the temptations are many. But Jaishankar showed that when you carry yourself with discipline and conviction, even the strongest headwinds can't knock you down. He didn't just protect India's interests in that moment, he elevated India's standing in the world. The lesson here is bigger than just foreign policy. It's about how relationships of any kind evolve, whether between nations or between people. Respect is the cornerstone of anything that lasts. You can't build something enduring on the foundation of pressure or manipulation. You build it on equality, on trust, on understanding that each side has its own dignity that must be honored. And that's what Jaishankar demanded in that one word, that respect be the baseline. So when we say that one word redefined US-India relations, we're not speaking in exaggeration. We're acknowledging that a single moment of clarity can do what years of speeches sometimes cannot. It can reset expectations. It can redraw boundaries. And it can remind the world that no matter how powerful the other side may be, true strength lies in knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone else dictate it. Because in the end, that one word didn't just shatter Trump's India plans. It built a stronger foundation for India's future. And so when we step back and look at the story we've just walked through, we see something much larger than a single conversation or a single clash of personalities. We see how one word, spoken with clarity and conviction, can shift the balance of power. We see how discipline outlasts impulse, how patience outmaneuvers pressure, and how respect, not dominance, must be the foundation of any true partnership. Jaishankar didn't just speak for India in that moment. He spoke for the idea that nations, like people, are strongest when they know who they are and refuse to compromise their dignity. That is why Trump's plans for India faltered. And that is why India's voice today carries further and rings louder than ever before. Because sometimes one word is all it takes to remind the world that strength, real strength, is never given. It's claimed.